In the sprawling city of Port-harcourt, a name echoed through the streets, synonymous with fear and reverence: Don FREGENE. A stalwart member of the Viking confraternity, Don FREGENE had navigated the treacherous waters of courtism for nearly 2 decades, earning a reputation as a formidable force. His storied past included a tenure as the Viking executioner during his school days, a distinction that commanded respect and inspired awe. Don FREGENE's exploits, however, were not limited to his school days. He had been a driving force behind the Vikings' numerous confrontations with rival confraternities, leading his comrades into the fray with a fierce determination. His name became synonymous with the Vikings' reign of terror, striking fear into the hearts of opposing cult members. However, Don FREGENE's reign of terror came to an abrupt end on November 22, 2023. On that fateful day, he fell victim to a hail of bullets, gunned down by members of the Icelanders confraternity. The Icelanders, a street-based offshoot of the Viking confraternity, had originally been exclusive to non-university students. However, over time, it had evolved into a more sinister entity, with its own hierarchy and agenda. Eyewitnesses recounted the events surrounding Don FREGENE's assassination in vivid detail. A blue vehicle, its occupants concealed behind masks, pulled up beside Don FREGENE. Without warning, the doors swung open, and a barrage of gunfire erupted, cutting down the Viking leader. The assailants, their faces hidden, showed no mercy, unleashing a relentless volley of shots until Don FREGENE's lifeless body slumped to the ground. As quickly as they had appeared, the Icelanders' hit squad vanished into the night, leaving behind a trail of chaos and destruction. The sudden, brutal nature of Don FREGENE's demise sent shockwaves through the cult underworld, a grim reminder of the ever-present danger that lurked in the shadows. The streets of Port-harcourt, once again, were painted red with the blood of a cult warlord, a testament to the unending cycle of violence that plagued the city. In the aftermath of Don FREGENE's brutal assassination, a cloud of uncertainty hung over the cult underworld, as rumors swirled regarding the true identity of his killers. However, as the news of his demise spread like wildfire, most members of the Vikings confraternity converged on a singular conclusion: the hit had been carried out by members of the Icelanders. This notion gained traction due to the well-documented history of animosity between Don FREGENE and the Icelanders. It was alleged that FREGENE had been embroiled in a bitter struggle for power and influence with certain members of the Icelanders, which had escalated into a series of intense altercations. The bad blood between FREGENE and the Icelanders had been simmering for quite some time, and many believed that this long-standing feud had ultimately led to his demise. The Icelanders, as previously mentioned, were the street-based offshoot of the Vikings confraternity. While the Vikings were primarily comprised of university students and alumni, the Icelanders drew their membership from a different demographic altogether. Typically, those who joined the Icelanders were individuals who had not attended university, including touts, street urchins, and other disenfranchised youths. Despite their humble origins, however, the Icelanders had earned a reputation for being exceedingly violent and ruthless. According to insiders, the Icelanders had amassed an arsenal of powerful firearms, including AK-47s and machine guns, which they used to maintain their grip on the streets. Their penchant for violence and intimidation had earned them a fearsome reputation, one that was whispered about in terror by those who crossed their path. Despite their fearsome reputation, however, the Icelanders were not entirely autonomous. As the street version of the Vikings confraternity, they owed a debt of allegiance to their parent organization. In fact, the Icelanders were known to pay homage to the Vikings, acknowledging the latter's supremacy and authority. This complex web of alliances and rivalries had created a volatile landscape, one in which the boundaries between loyalty and betrayal were constantly blurred. As the investigation into Don FREGENE's murder continued, many wondered whether the Icelanders' involvement would be proven conclusively. One thing, however, was certain: the killing had sent shockwaves through the cult underworld, exposing the deep-seated tensions and rivalries that simmered just beneath the surface. Don FREGENE's involvement in politics had earned him a significant amount of influence and connections, particularly among certain politicians in Rivers State. His ability to navigate the complex web of politics had allowed him to build a network of powerful allies, who often sought his counsel and assistance. However, rumors had begun to circulate that Don FREGENE had developed a penchant for embezzling funds allocated to him for distribution among the youth of his community. These alleged malfeasance had reportedly created a significant amount of resentment towards him, fostering a sense of betrayal among those who had once looked up to him as a leader. The repercussions of Don FREGENE's actions were swift and devastating. On the very same day that he was brutally assassinated by members of the Icelanders, a retaliatory hit was carried out by a Viking hit squad in Port-harcourt. The target of this counterattack were 2 members of the Icelanders, who were reportedly left with life-threatening injuries. Although the Icelanders were fortunate to have escaped with their lives, the incident marked a significant escalation in the conflict between the 2 groups. What made this development all the more shocking was the fact that the Icelanders and Vikings were not known to engage in violent conflicts with one another. Despite their differences, the 2 groups had historically maintained a sense of unity and solidarity, recognizing themselves as part of the same larger family. However, Don FREGENE's murder had apparently crossed a line, sparking a chain reaction of violence and retaliation that threatened to engulf both groups. As the news of the retaliatory hit spread, tensions between the Icelanders and Vikings continued to escalate. Many feared that the conflict would spiral out of control, leading to further bloodshed and instability. The once peaceful coexistence between the 2 groups now seemed like a distant memory, replaced by an atmosphere of mistrust and hostility. The future looked increasingly uncertain, as the Icelanders and Vikings struggled to come to terms with the new reality of their fractured relationship. The Viking hit squad, still seething with anger and seeking revenge for Don FREGENE's murder, continued their relentless pursuit of Icelandic members. Despite having already carried out 2 successful hits, the Vikings remained unsatisfied, and their thirst for revenge remained unquenched. In a brazen display of violence, the Viking hit squad struck again, targeting 2 more Icelandic members. The attack was swift and merciless, leaving both victims dead at the scene. However, even this latest act of violence failed to satiate the Vikings' appetite for revenge. In a shocking escalation of the conflict, the Viking hit squad launched yet another attack, this time targeting 3 Icelandic members. The outcome was devastating, with all 3 victims succumbing to their injuries instantly. The total number of Icelandic members killed by the Vikings had now risen to 5, a grim testament to the intensity of the conflict. Despite being heavily armed with powerful weapons like AK-47s and machine guns, the Icelanders chose not to retaliate against the Vikings. Recognizing that they held a significant battlefield advantage, the Icelanders opted instead to exercise restraint, seeking to avoid further escalation of the conflict. This decision was motivated by a deep-seated respect for the Vikings, who were, after all, their founders and mentors. The Icelanders' reluctance to engage in further violence was also influenced by their complex relationship with the Vikings. Many Icelandic members had been sponsored by Viking members in their pursuit of political power within the state. This patronage had created a web of dependencies and allegiances, which the Icelanders were keen to preserve. A notable example of this complex dynamic was the incident involving Eric the Red, one of the Viking confraternity's founders. Eric the Red, who had once served as second-in-command to the Vikings' first executioner, Rising Angel the Camelus, at the University of Port-harcourt, had been kidnapped by Icelandic members. However, upon realizing that their captive was, in fact, Eric the Red, the Icelanders quickly released him, citing their ignorance of his true identity. This incident highlighted the deep-seated respect that the Icelanders had for the Vikings, as well as their desire to maintain a semblance of peace and stability. Despite the recent flare-up in violence, the Icelanders remained committed to finding a peaceful resolution to the conflict, one that would preserve their relationships with the Vikings and avoid further bloodshed.